According to The Guardian, a quietly maintained website for the elite Dialog retreats, co-founded by Peter Thiel, accidentally exposed a directory of past and potential participants, and that leak has sent ripples across politics, technology, and finance. For Palantir investors and followers of the broader Thiel ecosystem, this matters because it offers a rare, structural glimpse into how power networks around Thiel operate, how they intersect with governments worldwide, and what that might imply for Palantir's risk and opportunity landscape over the coming years. According to the Guardian news report, Dialog is an invitation-only series of retreats that began around the mid-2000s and has often been compared to quiet, elite gatherings like Bilderberg. The format is off the record, non-attribution, with senior people from politics, tech, finance, and media discussing global affairs away from public scrutiny. The newly exposed list names key Trump-aligned figures, foreign officials from Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, heavyweight tech founders and executives, and prominent media voices. Although Palantir as a company is not the main subject, Peter Thiel's central role and the presence of multiple AI and data ecosystem leaders make this directly relevant for anyone who treats Palantir as a long-term, geopolitically exposed technology asset. The Guardian mentions that the list was embedded in the Dialog website's source code and captured by the Internet Archive, then surfaced by a hacktivist on Blue Sky. That technical detail, while minor on its own, is a useful reminder for investors. Information about elite networks and influence often leaks not through whistleblowers or official disclosures, but through accidental digital footprints. From a Palantir-specific angle, it echoes the world the company inhabits, one where data, archives, and obscure metadata can suddenly become very important. The article notes that this directory pulls together a cross-section of government, corporate, and cultural power, including many people who likely attended Dialog events before Thiel became tightly associated with the populist right and the Trump era. For Palantir shareholders, that is a key nuance. Thiel's public brand, especially in U.S. politics, is sharply polarizing. Yet his long-running networks, as evidenced by Dialog, are ideologically wide. Democrats and Republicans, U.S. and foreign officials, mainstream media figures, and contrarian thinkers. That breadth of ties can both mitigate and amplify Palantir's political risk profile. From an investment perspective, the core questions are, how does a leak like this change the perception of Thiel's ecosystem? Does it alter regulatory or reputational risk around Palantir, and could it indirectly affect the company's government and commercial pipeline? Let's unpack this in a focused way. According to The Guardian, the leaked names cover serving and former U.S. government officials, foreign leaders and ministers, tech and finance executives, and influential intellectuals and media personalities. On the U.S. side, the directory reportedly includes sitting senators from both major parties, current governors, and Trump-era officials. Several Democrats quoted in the piece move quickly to distance themselves, emphasizing either that they are not members, or that their involvement was a one-off speaking engagement from years ago. That distancing behavior is a signal. It suggests that association with Thiel-branded elite gatherings is now politically sensitive, particularly inside the Democratic Party. For Palantir investors, this dynamic has two-layered implications. First, on the opportunity side, Thiel's tight relationships with Republican and nationalist-leaning circles have clearly helped open doors for Palantir in certain defense and security contexts, especially in earlier years. The broader ecosystem around Thiel, which includes Dialog, the Founders Fund Network, and a range of right-of-center policy entrepreneurs, has given Palantir privileged access to decision-makers who are receptive to surveillance, data fusion, and predictive analytics tools. Second, on the risk side, that same political lean creates friction in jurisdictions and agencies where Thiel is seen as ideologically threatening or culturally alien. The Guardian piece demonstrates that even some centrist or establishment Democrats, when faced with public scrutiny of their links to a Thiel-founded forum, instinctively move to disavow deeper ties. This mirrors the tension Palantir has occasionally faced when bidding for contracts in more progressive-leaning bureaucracies, or in European countries where data privacy norms and anti-surveillance sentiment are stronger. Investors should therefore read this leak as a fresh case study in the trade-off. Thiel's networks are broad and high-powered, but politically costly in some arenas. The leak doesn't invent that dynamic, but it makes it more visible and thus potentially more salient for regulators, journalists, and activist groups who already distrust Palantir's model. The Guardian cites Janine Waddell, a scholar of elites and transnational power networks, who warns that gatherings like Dialog allow financial, tech, and political elites to shape agendas and opinions in secret, outside democratic scrutiny. Whether or not one agrees with her normative framing, this analysis is useful for investors because it describes the environment in which Palantir operates, a world where unelected networks coordinate around security, technology, and capital flows. For Palantir, whose business is to build the software backbone of intelligence, defense, and critical infrastructure. Such networks are both customer base and risk vector. On the bullish side, as long as state and quasi-state elites coordinate around data-driven governance and military modernization, demand for Palantir-style platforms can stay robust. On the cautious side, if public backlash against shadow elites grows, companies symbolically linked to that world become easy targets for investigative campaigns, legislative hearings, and restrictions. According to The Guardian News, the Dialog list includes distinguished names like former Treasury secretaries, high-ranking Justice Department alumni, former FDA and State Department officials, and powerful conservative activists like Leonard Leo. On the tech and business side, the directory features Elon Musk, Greg Brockman from OpenAI, YouTube's Neil Mohan, former Google chief Eric Schmidt, venture capitalist Chamath Palihapitiya, and others. Many of these players sit close to the core debates about AI, digital infrastructure, and the future of the internet, debates that Palantir is also deeply embedded in. Here's why that matters for Palantir watchers. Thiel himself is a central figure in both Palantir and Dialog. Even where Palantir is not explicitly discussed in such gatherings, the presence of so many AI, platform, and defense-adjacent leaders in Thiel's orbit suggests ongoing, informal alignment around themes Palantir cares about: national security, AI governance, public-private partnerships, and strategic autonomy in technology. If Dialog and similar retreats are where consensus gets quietly shaped, then they likely contribute to the emerging view among Western elites that geopolitical rivalry is here to stay, data and AI are central to state power, and there is a need to harden critical infrastructure against both physical and cyber threats. This worldview is deeply favorable to Palantir's long-term opportunity set, even if Palantir is not the only beneficiary. From a risk standpoint, the same concentration of influence is exactly what critics of Palantir point to when arguing that the company sits at the heart of an unaccountable security tech complex. The Guardian's highlighting of Jeffrey Epstein's invitation to a past Dialog retreat, even if his actual attendance is unknown, feeds into a narrative that these elite spaces are ethically compromised and detached from normal accountability. Investors need to be honest about the reputational spillover when Thiel-linked institutions are connected, however tangentially, to disgraced figures like Epstein. Activists and hostile media can easily extend that shadow to Palantir, regardless of the factual ties. The Guardian mentions that Dialog is building a permanent campus in the Washington suburbs and that this year's retreat is slated, according to other reporting, to take place near Dublin, with sessions on topics such as nuclear power, global conflict, sex, and cults. That list of topics is broad, but the inclusion of World War scenarios and nuclear issues indicates a focus on high-stakes security and systemic risk, areas deeply intertwined with Palantir's government and defense contracts. For institutional investors, it is useful to think of Dialog as one node in a wider lattice of influence, where people who guide procurement, regulation, and narrative around security technologies convene. Even without direct Palantir representation on the leaked list, Thiel's overlapping roles mean that Palantir's interests will often be conceptually present when the future of warfare, intelligence, or digital sovereignty is discussed. That helps explain why Palantir has been able to position itself repeatedly as a default partner for governments under pressure. The groundwork is laid in these semi-private idea markets. Now, does this leak change Palantir's near-term fundamentals? In a strictly financial modeling sense, probably not dramatically. The story centers on Dialog's membership, not on Palantir's contracts or performance. However, for long-duration shareholders and those treating Palantir as a strategic, quasi-defense holding, there are three medium-term considerations. First, regulatory and political scrutiny. Every time there is fresh reporting about secretive Thiel-backed gatherings, it raises the salience of questions around influence, lobbying, and conflicts of interest. That, in turn, can stiffen the resolve of politicians and regulators who want more transparency in government tech procurement, particularly when it touches surveillance or AI-driven decision-making. Palantir could face more rigorous oversight on bids, more aggressive questioning in public hearings, or new disclosure obligations, especially in jurisdictions wary of concentrated tech security power. Second, reputational optionality. Palantir's value proposition to many of its most critical customers is not just its software, but its perceived alignment with Western security interests and its access to elite decision circles. The Dialog leak confirms that Thiel's ecosystem still holds substantial convening power across borders and parties, even as some attendees publicly distance themselves. That supports the thesis that Palantir will continue to benefit from who-you-know dynamics in defense and intelligence. At the same time, the more visible these networks become, the easier it is for Palantir's critics to frame the company as emblematic of a captured, unaccountable security state. Third, international customer sentiment. European officials, Middle Eastern royals, and Asian ministers appear on the leaked Dialog list. Many of these same regions are central to Palantir's expansion ambitions beyond the US and UK. Some foreign governments may see participation in Thiel-linked forums as a signal of insider access to powerful US tech and political networks. Others, especially in democracies with strong privacy cultures, may fear domestic backlash if close ties to Palantir, Thiel, or US intelligence-adjacent circles are overexposed. Investors should therefore treat this leak as a reminder that Palantir's international growth is not merely about product-market fit. It is also about the social and political acceptability of the networks surrounding Thiel. The Guardian includes commentary from participants who defend Dialog as a useful, non-partisan space for candid discussions, and from experts who see such spaces as corrosive to democracy because they shape decisions without public input. That tension parallels the core debate around Palantir's role. Is it a necessary tool for governments operating in a dangerous world, or is it a catalyst for unaccountable, algorithmic governance that sidelines democratic oversight? From the vantage point of a stock analyst or an engaged retail investor, the answer is less about choosing a moral camp and more about mapping how that debate influences the company's regulatory perimeter and brand. If, over time, public opinion hardens against secretive tech government entanglements, demand for radical transparency in procurement and algorithmic accountability will grow. Palantir will then need to invest more in explainability, governance tooling, and open communication strategies to maintain trust with both regulators and the public. On the other side, if geopolitical fragmentation and security fears continue to intensify, many electorates may accept, even welcome, stronger surveillance and predictive systems in exchange for perceived safety and stability. In such a scenario, networks like Dialog become even more central to how elites coordinate their approach to security technology, and Palantir's embeddedness in that environment becomes a competitive advantage. For long-term Palantir holders, the key takeaway is this: the Dialog leak does not tell you whether Palantir will beat earnings next quarter, but it does highlight the structural environment in which the company lives. It confirms that Peter Thiel remains at the intersection of political, financial, and tech elites worldwide. There is growing public and academic concern about secretive forums shaping security, technology, and economic agendas. Association with Thiel's network carries both access benefits and political reputation costs, which can spill over to Palantir. Investors should incorporate those structural factors into their risk-reward thinking. On the upside, Palantir continues to enjoy unparalleled proximity to decision-makers in defense and government, which can sustain a robust pipeline of complex, high-margin contracts. On the downside, the company is likely to remain a lightning rod in debates about surveillance capitalism, AI and warfare, and the democratic legitimacy of elite-driven tech policy. Finally, a practical note for investors and enthusiasts following Palantir news flows. It is easy to focus exclusively on product announcements, new contracts, or quarterly metrics. Stories like this one remind us that for companies deeply entwined with national security and state capacity, the informal architecture of power, who meets whom, in what context, under what level of secrecy, can be just as important in the long arc. It is not that every retreat or leaked list directly changes revenues. Rather, it sets the tone of the global conversation about the role of firms like Palantir in the 21st century state. So, when you think about Palantir's valuation, moat, and risk profile, it is worth folding in this layer. Peter Thiel does not just own a stake in a government software company, he also curates elite spaces, like Dialog, where the future of security, data, and AI is debated far from public view. Whether you view that as a bullish structural tailwind or a long-term liability depends on your reading of where democratic politics, privacy norms, and geopolitical pressures are heading. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you found this analysis helpful, consider subscribing and sharing so you don't miss future deep dives into how political power networks shape the fortunes of major tech and defense stocks.